What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Braun Bafflestone, and today we are having another episode of my review and rating series, where I look at various game mechanics and give you my opinion. Today we are looking at the new martial feats introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I know that I have been largely wizard and spellcaster oriented so far, but I do want to appeal and help as many people as possible. So today we are going to be looking at the new martial feats. They are a welcome addition, and so I'm very interested in seeing if they're any good. So let's take a look. So we will be doing these in alphabetical order, starting with Crusher. So this is a half feat that provides a bonus to strength or con. And this is a pretty nice addition because previously there were few viable non-racially restricted options for strength in particular, but con wasn't doing that great as well. So the half feat part is really fantastic, especially if used at first level with variant human or with custom race, because you can then start with an 18 in your strength, which is really impressive for a feat. The push effect is fantastic. I mean, it can create free disengage, can end grappled, can enable booming blade by pushing them away and forcing them to make the choice of either closing the range to do damage or not take damage themselves, and can leverage persistent area of effects. So that's awesome. The debuff is pretty awesome as well on a critical because it enables stronger attacks from all party members. So once you get a crit with this, everybody just piles onto that dude and he is basically toast. This is better than the slashing debuff, which we will look at here shortly, because that adds disadvantage to the target's attack, so it doesn't have the wide-ranging effects that this debuff can have. There is strong synergy with crit fishing builds, polearm master, and 2-weapon fighting, and it is not restricted to martials. It's an interesting option for Order of Scribes wizards because they can make their spells bludgeoning. Also, Dao Pact warlocks because Genie's Wrath adds bludgeoning damage once per turn. And any class that uses Magic Stone can get use out of Crusher. So half feat that provides all of these amazing benefits, I love it. I give it a rating of superior. Next up, we have Fighting Initiate. So this is pretty strong as well. Fighting styles generally are very strong relative to feats. Many are always on versus, Crusher, Piercer, Slasher have these abilities available only one time per turn. However, it's not a half feat. So the always on bump gained from your stat bump or stat increase if it starts off as odd is nice, and you don't get that with Fighting Initiate. But it does provide some really fantastic abilities and reactions like blind fighting or defensive duelist. I personally think blind fighting style is really strong. Do note that the prereq means that blade singers can't get it right away. I did a few videos on blade singers and a lot of people didn't like that I started with alert and suggested Fighting Initiate instead, but that's just not possible with the prereq for a proficiency with martial weapon. So overall, I think this is a really nice addition, and I give it a rating of superior. Next up, we have Piercer. So this is another half feat tied to strength or dex. Again, a very nice addition. It has no secondary effects like Crusher or Slasher. It's damage bumps only. It is viable for archers since they use piercing damage. It is viable for Wild Shape, unlike Crusher, because Wild Shape is is piercing or slashing. There is good synergy with half-orc savage attacks racial ability and the Orcish Fury racial feat, because these add damage or dice rolls, and this feat is better when you have more dice rolls. There is strong synergy with crit fishing builds and 2-weapon fighting. And when you do the math, the damage bump is unimpressive. It's generally between +1 and +2 in most scenarios, although that's just looking at this in isolation. Don't forget, it is a half feat, So that will take you, if that takes you up to the next stat level, you will get an always on +1. So that will be added to these additional effects of Piercer. The way it works, the bump increases with the number of dice rolled because it's only one time per turn, and the more dice you roll, the greater chance you have of a low roll that you can improve with a reroll. But do be aware you have to take the effect of the reroll. So if you're using it, pretty close to the mean, you might actually lose damage because of this, because you don't get to choose. You have to take the second roll. The bump increases the higher damage die you have. Obviously, D12 would be the ideal scenario there. And so even though it has a pretty small average bump, it is high variability. It's built all around criticals and such. So that can be fun for some people. I mean, not everyone goes entirely by average damage like I do. Some people do like that high variability because it's fun, right? It's fun to hit a critical, that little rush you feel when you see that 20. It's fun to re-roll a 1 and you get a much better damage score. So, your mileage may vary. If you're a robot like me who tends to look at things over the course of 1,000 battles, it's not as good. But if you're someone who values those little emotional rushes that pop up from time to time, it can be a lot of fun. So overall rating, I think it is poor in isolation, but if you really create a strong build synergy, it can be average. Next we have Poisoner. And this is very thematically interesting. There's definitely some appeal to offensive-minded players, as well as players that are, kind of shady in their role-playing aspect. It does create bonus action clog because it the application of it does call for a bonus action. So you might not want to do it with another, a build that requires a lot of bonus action activity. It is better for melee than archers because the poison procs on a hit. So if you miss as an archer, you have to reapply. But if you miss as melee, you don't have to reapply. Now, the save DC of the created poison doesn't scale. It's always 14. So that's not particularly impressive at higher levels. Check with your DM about the Poisoner Kit proficiency bonus. Rules as written, it only applies to checks, but he might be generous and allow this to apply to the save as well, and that definitely makes it better. The bonus action to apply poisons also works with Dungeon Master's Guide poisons, right? You don't have to use the poison that you create with this feat. You can use some of the way better poisons available in the Dungeon Master's Guide, particularly Oil of Taggart. Looking at Oil of Taggart here, really effective, and 400 gold may be affordable depending on the campaign that you're in. Now, it doesn't affect immunity. It only eliminates resistance, and poison immunity is fairly common, and it becomes more common at higher levels. So this one gets a weird rating. I consider it average at low levels. I think it scales to poor at higher levels, but it can be good if you have strong access to and can afford some of the Dungeon Master's Guide poisons like Oil of Taggart. Very interesting feat, however. Nice addition. Next up, we have Skill Expert. So this isn't on its face necessarily a martial feat, but you can use it to get expertise in athletics, and that has some significant combat benefits, because shoving prone is an excellent tactic, because that causes the target to become subject to lots of attacks at disadvantage until it can get up again. If you can get more than 4 total attacks after shoving a target prone, you are coming out ahead. That's the threshold. The attacks can come from you yourself, but you can also use your colleagues, or if you have summons, for example, or like animate objects or something that might be really amazing. If you knock them prone, and then you just get all sorts of attacks at advantage. You can combo this with effects that remove mobility so that they just can't get up. Right? Once they're prone, you can grapple them, you can restrain them, although restrained already gives attacks at advantage. And the Conquest Paladin's Fear aura, right? They can't move if they're in his aura. So those are all really nice combinations. So I think Skill Expert is sneaky good. I give it a rating of average in low levels because you don't really have all of these attacks available to shove with, but it scales to good once you get to higher levels when you have multiple attacks. The final feat that is available to marshals from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is Slasher. And this one is not super impressive to me. Again, a half feat, so that's a nice addition. There is synergy with crit fishing builds and 2-weapon fighting. It is viable for Wild Shape, unlike Crusher, but the debuffs are unimpressive to me relative to Crusher. I mean, they can be decent if you're kiting or if you're combining them with other speed debuffs, but to me in a vacuum, just lowering their speed by 10 is not a hugely impressive debuff, so I just give Slasher a rating of average. So that's it. That's my opinion of the new martial feats from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Some really nice additions. Out of the 5, I rated 2 superior. So let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Braun Bafflestone. See you next time.